In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace a timing belt kit on this Audi A4. This happens to be on the 2.0 liter turbocharged engine, and this is going to be located on the front of the engine. Let's get into it. We're going to remove these screws. Use a T30 socket. Underneath, there's going to be 3 fasteners right there, and there should be a shield underneath here. This vehicle doesn't have it. You want to take those out, use a T30 socket, and remove that shield as well. Using the tool from the trunk, go in the center cap, and just pull it off. Using a 17mm socket, take the lug bolts off. Before you take the last one off, I'm just going to hold the wheel so it doesn't fall. Take that off and grab the wheel and slide it off. We're going to remove part of the inner fender well. Just use a trim tool. Just take this push pin out. Just pop that one out. Using a T25 socket, remove these screws. Pull the inner fender well back. If there's any push pins along the bottom, you want to take those out as well. Just slide this back a little bit. We can see right here. We'll take those 2 out. Same T25 socket. On this part of the bumper, there's 2 studs going this way. You need to take those 2 nuts off. You're going to use a 10mm socket. So we're going to peel back the inner fender well a little bit more. Set that aside. Using my 10mm socket. Take the nuts out. Grab that. And do the same to the other side. And then you can grab it from the sides. Just pull forward. Pull the bumper cover out. And if you have fog lights, you're gonna have to disconnect connector over here. Push down on the tab and slide that off. Using a T30 socket, there's a screw right here. Take that one out. There's one here. You're not going to take it out. You're just going to loosen it because the headlight is slotted. And then down here, the T30 socket, you're going to need a long extension. And same deal. Just loosen that up. Because it's slotted, you can grab the headlight assembly and it just slides forward. Disconnect the connector, just push down on the tab, and do the same for the other side. Remove the cap, the coolant. Make sure the engine's cold when you're doing this. Just set that aside. Now, underneath, near the radiator, we're going to drain the coolant. There's a little wing nut right here. You have to loosen that up. You could use a little pair of pliers if you need to. Just be careful not to break it. Just put a drain bucket underneath. It should come right out there. There we go. Let that drain out. And now we're going to close up that drain. Just twist that. And just close that up. That's good. Remove these 2 screws. Use a Phillips head screwdriver. Take this piece off. This is just the snorkel for the air intake. And just pull the weather strip out. Just pull this off. Set that aside. Those panels on the side here, we want to take those off. Use a T20 socket. Take these screws out. Take that screw out and then just grab this panel. Just twist it. It'll come right out. You can do the same on the other side. And just slide it out. We're going to disconnect the connector for the horns. Just push the tab down, slide the connector off. You're just pushing on that. Do the same on the other side. Now using a triple square M10 socket, I'm going to take these bolts out. All right, those are loose. Pull those bolts out. Grab the bar and slide it out. Disconnect the connector right here on the AC high pressure switch. We're going to take these bolts out. Use a 13mm socket. You're going to do the same on the other side. We're going to leave that nut right there. That's going to just hold this bracket in place. Using a T30 socket, take this screw out. Do the same on the other side. Take these two screws out, T30 socket. Same on the other side. And the connectors over here on the driver's side, we're just going to disconnect those. Just push down on the tab, slide that off, and grab the connector. Rock that back and forth. Do the same on the bottom one. Just try pulling it out first. And then we can disconnect it here. Push down on the tab, slide that off. Disconnect the upper radiator hose. Just use a pick. Just take this clip out. You can put it in service mode, or sometimes it's just easier to take the clip out completely. Grab the hose, slide it off. Follow the hood cable. Just grab right here. We'll just pop that off. It's just clipped in. Disconnect this connector down here. Just push down on the tab. Slide that off. And you want to just hold the front end a little bit. You should be able to tip this forward. Remove this cover, just grab underneath and just pop it up out of the way. Now using a 17mm wrench, loosen up the tension on the tensioner. Slide that over. I have a pin. You could always use a hex key as well. Just slide that in there. That way you can just take the wrench off and the belt is still loose. You take the belt off. Slide that off the alternator, the power steering, off the AC compressor and idler. I'm going to loosen up these bolts. Use a 13mm socket. The tensioner out. Using some hose clamp pliers, take this hose clamp off, and using a pick, get underneath the hose. Just drain that coolant out. And I'll just set that hose aside. Just make sure it's up high so it's not dripping anymore. Now we're going to take these bolts out for the crank pulley. You're going to use a triple square socket. This is a M10. Then I'll use a 12.19 millimeter socket on the center to prevent the crank from spinning. Get those broken free. Take those out. And that's the last one. Take that off. Grab the pulley. Just use a pry bar, just be careful. It should just slide off. This one's a little rusty. You don't want to break the case. There we go, slide that off. Now using a T30 socket, take some of these screws out. Just gonna loosen them up first. There we go. And the two upper ones. All right, those are all loose. Take these out. Go, that's all the bolts. Just grab the covers. Those will come off. And there's one more bolt that you can't get off unless you take the top cover off. Use the same T30 socket. Take that bolt out. Before we take the lower cover off, you can see on the harmonic balancer, the crank pulley, there is a little timing mark right here. You might have to use your finger and just try to find it with your fingernail. That's where it is. You want that to line up. If we put it back on, make sure the tab is in the right spot. You could even thread one of the bolts in. You can see we're trying to get it to line up with that arrow. So you want to turn it to the right. Always turn it clockwise till that lines up. And then you should see right here, that should line up with that arrow. There. If that's all set, then you're good. The engine is in top dead center. You can take this apart again. Take that cover off. Now that the engine's timed, we're going to loosen up the tensioner. Just using a 8mm hex key. I'm just going to hold a little tension up with this while we loosen up the nut using a 13mm socket, just so the belt doesn't all of a sudden spring loose. Loosen that up, and we can push down on that. That's good. I was watching the gears while that was loosening, just making sure they didn't spin, which they didn't. Get that loose. Take the tensioner off. Take the nut off. And just slide that off. Oh, that moved a little bit. That's okay. Slide that off. Using a 10mm socket, take these bolts out. Just using a small pry bar, just gently pry this away. I have to rock it back and forth a little bit. You might want a drain bucket underneath there as well. There we go. Just have a drain bucket underneath. Take the water pump. You want to put the O-ring over the water pump. It gets slid right onto there. Then take a little bit of coolant and just lubricate the O-ring with some coolant. All right, that's good. Line the water pump up. If you needed to, just clean out any of this. If there's any corrosion in there, just use a rag and some brake parts cleaner, or even a little emery cloth if it's caked on pretty thick. Slide that in place. Might have to twist it a little bit, get it lined up. There we go. Take the water pump bolts, get those started. And torque these bolts to 11 foot-pounds. We're going to replace the damper roller. Use a 13mm socket. Loosen up the bolt. Take the new one, put the bolt through. Snug that down. And we'll torque this to 18 foot-pounds. This lower one, use a 12mm socket. Loosen up the bolt. Take that off. There's a little retainer holding that bolt in. Just pull that off. Get that lined up. And we'll torque this one to 25 foot-pounds. Now before I put the belt on, just because the cam gears could move, or the sprocket down below here could move for the on the main shaft, the crank, I'm just going to mark this just with a Sharpie, just where it is, just in case it does move a little bit. It's okay. You could do this before you take the belt off as well. You want to take the belt, just get it underneath here. Go around the water pump. And go under that damper pulley. And before we completely put it around here, we do want to move this pulley. We want to make this tighter. I'm just going to move it slightly, just using a 16mm wrench. Just going to move this, just be careful. Get that arrow to line up. Just needed to move it about 2 notches. Can slide that around. A little bit tricky to get everything to line up. Take the tensioner. You can see there's a plate on the back here. That's going to go in that hole there. So we're going to go over the stud, have the belt come out, go over that stud. Just get that to line up. Double check everything. So my timing marks did move over here. That looks good down there. So we will take this, just try to loosen this up. Get this to move. The belt is tight on this side, and that mark lines up, and the mark down below lines up still. I'm going to put the nut on here. We're still going to check it again with the cover. Now when we're tensioning the tensioner, you just want the nut finger tight or even a little bit looser. And then as we tighten this up, you can see there's a little pin right there, or a little nub that sticks out, and then below it there's a little notch, and it's got to line up with that notch right there. You see, that's going to go right there. So you want that there. And then we're going to torque that nut to 18 foot-pounds. 18 foot-pounds. Double check your timing marks. That looks good. Looks good down below. I'm going to just make sure that belt's all the way around the lower pulley, the lower sprocket. And put the cover on. There we go. Then we'll test the pulley and make sure that's centered in there, and that looks good. So that timing mark lines up there. This one lines up here. So you can see there's a little bit of play, but you need to find the center of it with the pin in there, or you can put the bolts on and double check. But as long as that's lined up and your top one's lined up, you're good. Put the screws in. And snug those up. I'll line the crank pulley up. Get the bolts started. We're going to torque these bolts. It's recommended that you replace the bolts, but you want to torque those to 7 foot-pounds and then an additional 90 degrees. So we'll just go around and torque them all to 7 first. All right, so they're all torqued to 7 foot-pounds, and then just go the additional 90 degrees. If you don't have a torque angle meter, do the best you can. That's good. Let's move on to the other ones. Now we just need to adjust the pulley just to get that timing mark lined up. Just move that a little bit, and that lines up. And the top one's lined up, so that's good. You can turn the engine over a few times and just make sure that it lines up. But chances are, if it lined up right there, and then it's good. And you always want to go clockwise. Oh, there was the mark right there, and the timing mark for the cam is on the opposite side, so we're going to go around one more time. That's right there, that's lined up, and it's lined up right there. So you have to do 2 revolutions for them to line up again, but it's better to check multiple times and just be sure. Take the timing cover, just make sure you slide it in down below. Get that lined up. There we go, that's lined up. Put the bolts in, get those started. And snug those up. And take this coolant hose that goes across. Slide that over. And move the clamp. And take the tensioner. Get the bolts started. We'll torque these bolts to 17 foot-pounds. Now we're going to put the ribbed belt on, the Serpentine belt. Slide it over the crank pulley. It's going to go underneath the tensioner pulley. And then down below, you're going to go underneath the AC compressor. And then come back. And on the back side, it's going to go around this idler pulley. It's going to go around the power steering pump. And then up over the alternator. Make sure that's all lined up. It's over all the pulleys. Yep, that looks good. Using the 17mm wrench, take the tension off the tensioner, and carefully pull that pin out, and let go of the tensioner. We're going to connect the connector, and push that in there. Good. Now connect the connectors. And just slide this into the bracket. Lock those in place. That's good. Slide that one into the bracket. Good. And the hood release cable. Make sure you get that lined up in behind here. Sure that goes in place. I'm going to lock it down. Before you close the hood, it's a good idea to test the latch. Just make sure that you got the cable in there properly. You can activate the latch and then just go release it just with a screwdriver. Take this clip, reinstall that. And then as we push this in place, take that, line that up, lock that down onto the radiator. Get that lined up. And the other side. Get that started. And get the other bolt started. Make sure those wires are out of the way. And before we tighten those down, we'll just line these up top, get the bolts started, just make it easier. And do that on both sides. And on the side. And we'll tighten these down. You can see where the bolts were, so just get as close as possible to where the bolt in the washer was. So you might have to lift it, make some adjustments if you have to. Snug those down. And same on this side. See, that's off a little bit, so you might have to loosen up the other side. Just raise this up a little. Get that close. There we go. Tighten those down. And tighten that down the other side. We'll torque these bolts to 17 foot-pounds. And now we'll tighten these down. Snug those down. And just connect the connector for the pressure sensor. And take the bumper, line that up, and take the bolts, get those started. And just do the same on the other side. Then we want to torque these to 17 foot-pounds. That's good. Plug the horns in. Make sure that locks down. Take this panel. Get this in place. That's good. And the other side. That's good. Take these air deflectors, line those up, twist those in place. And take the screws. Get those started. Snug those down, and then the lower screw as well. And then you can do the same on the other side. Now take this weather strip and slide this in place. I'm going to take this intake, just slide this underneath. It's going to go there, and those are going to go together. And put the screws in. Snug those down and connect the connector. And line this up. Get that headlight lined up. Snug those down. Make sure it looks like it's lined up right with the fender. If not, you can loosen them up and make adjustments. Now slide the bumper in position. Before we do, we got to connect the connector over here. Plug that in, make sure that's tight. Line this up. Make sure you line the studs up on the sides. And push that in. We can get the two nuts that are going to go on those studs. And get the two nuts started. Tighten those down. Take these screws, get these started. Tighten those down. Inner fender well, get that lined up. And get the screws and push pins back in place. There's one up here. And we'll tighten those down. Snug those up. Do the same on the other side. Take the wheel, slide it in position. The lug bolts, get that started. Snug that down, then you can let go of the wheel. Snug those down. Now I'm going to torque the lug bolts to 90 foot-pounds in a cross pattern to tighten the wheel down evenly. And just go around again, double check. Good. Take the center cap, where the hole is, you want that lined up with the valve stem. Just line that up. Tap it on. Underneath, if you have the splash shield and the retainers, you want to put that back and install the bolts right there. This vehicle does not. And up top, put the bolts in. Get those started. Snug those down. And you want to top off the coolant. Use the appropriate coolant for the vehicle, a 50-50 mix. You can use a funnel, pour it in. You want to fill it up to the max line. Put the cap on, then start the vehicle and run the vehicle, constantly monitoring the level and also monitoring the engine temperature, and make sure the engine temperature does not go overheating. After about 15 to 20 minutes, you want to shut the vehicle off, let the vehicle cool down, and then adjust the level accordingly.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.